Okay, so imagine a world where science wasn't just about cold, hard formulas, but about actually communicating with the spirits of nature. I know, it sounds wild, but that was the world of the Renaissance physician and alchemist Paracelsus. He saw the planet not as a bunch of dead matter, but as a living, breathing thing, full of intelligent beings. So today, we're not just looking at his science, we're diving into the mythology that powered it all. These elemental spirits he believed were the key to, well, pretty much everything.
And this quote right here was his whole mission statement. For him, a doctor couldn't just treat a symptom, like a cough or a fever. No, to truly heal someone, you had to be a philosopher of nature, someone connected to reality on every single level. It's a pretty amazing idea, right? But it immediately makes you wonder,
Exactly. What are these levels of existence? Was he talking about things we can see and touch, or something else? This is the absolute key to unlocking his entire way of thinking, which was this incredible blend of the real, observable world and the totally invisible.
And here it is, the answer. To Paracelsus, the universe wasn't just empty space and dead rock. Not at all. It was alive. It was pulsing with this hidden intelligence. He truly believed that inside every single element, every stone, every river, every flame, there lived a spirit. And this wasn't just him being poetic. This was the foundation of his science. So, here's the map for our little journey today. We're going to start by getting a handle on this animated world of his. Then, we're going to meet the actual inhabitants of each of the four classical elements: earth, water, air, and fire. And finally, we'll piece it all together to see what his legacy really is. All right, let's step into his lab. What he was doing was something we could call occult chemistry. And he wasn't just making up fairy tales for fun. He was actually building this revolutionary system where the laws of nature were explained by, the personalities and actions of these spirits. He divided this whole spirit world into four great kingdoms.
And here they are. You've got the gnomes of the earth, the undines of water, the sylphs of the air, and the salamanders of fire. For him, these weren't just stories you tell kids. They were fundamental forces of nature. So, let's meet the first group. First stop, we're descending deep, deep into the earth. This is the realm of the gnomes, who he saw as the keepers of the planet's biggest secrets and its greatest treasures.
Now, Paracelsus had a really specific idea of what gnomes were. They weren't creatures of flesh and bone. Instead, he thought they were made of this really fine, subtle stuff that let them pass right through solid rock as easily as a fish swims through water. They were the guardians of all the deep places, the keepers of every single crystal, mineral, and precious metal hidden way down below our feet.
You can see how this belief would change everything about how you treat the earth. If you were a physician back then and you needed minerals for your medicines, you didn't just go out and dig a hole. Mining became a negotiation. You had to learn to respect the earth, to understand its hidden properties, what he called its astral wealth, by forming a kind of relationship with its guardians, the gnomes.
And here's where you can really see the two sides of his mind working together. The story, the parable, is that you have to befriend the gnomes to learn their secrets. But the science? This was a brilliant framework for teaching geology and toxicology. It was a memorable story that taught his students to be incredibly sharp observers, to learn the difference between a healing crystal and a poisonous ore through careful study, not just blind luck.
okay, from the solid earth, our journey now flows into the liquid realm of water. This was the home of the Undines, the beings who personified water's life-giving power.
Paracelsus saw the Undines as the very spirit of water, but he gave their story this really poignant twist. He said they were born without an immortal human soul, and the only way they could ever get one was to fall in love with and marry a mortal human. I mean, this beautiful, almost tragic myth created a really powerful, personal connection between humanity and the forces of nature.
So the parable taught that water could cleanse and heal, but the science behind it was an early form of chemistry and, really, hydrotherapy. The idea that each spring had its own unique undine was basically a poetic way of saying that each water source has a unique chemical makeup. This helped explain why a holy well in one town might be good for skin problems, while a spring in another could help with stomach issues. The myth was a guide to actually observing the real world. Okay, we've explored the earth and the water. Now we're going to ascend into the invisible world of the air. This is the domain of the sylphs, the masters of the wind. Paracelsus didn't picture the sylphs as gentle little fairies.
He described them as being taller and stronger than humans. They weren't just a soft breeze. They were the absolute masters of the weather and the vital air that we all need to breathe. They literally commanded the winds and the sky.
And this is where his thinking gets almost shockingly modern. He had this theory that plagues and diseases were carried on what he called maledictory winds, basically cursed air. I mean, think about that. Hundreds of years before we discovered microbes, he was describing airborne disease transmission. He didn't have the language of germ theory, so he explained it through the actions of angry or malevolent sylphs. It's just incredible.
So the story goes that the air contained this invisible life force he called mumia. The science behind it, though, was a new focus on public and environmental health. For Paracelsus, the quality of the air you breathed was a form of medicine. It wasn't just about oxygen, it was a spiritual exchange with the universe, and the sylphs were in charge. Clean air meant a healthy life. Polluted air meant you were going to get sick. Simple as that.
And now, we enter the most powerful, the most dangerous, and the most transformative realm of them all, the heart of the alchemical fire, the home of the salamanders. Now get this, to Paracelsus, the salamanders were not simply creatures that lived in the fire. No. They were the fire itself, its raw living essence. They were the most elusive and powerful of all the elementals, the very spark of transformation that could either create brand new substances or just reduce old ones to a pile of ash.
So how did this actually play out in the lab? Well, the salamander's influence was the engine of all alchemy. First, they inhabit the heat of the furnace. Then, they influence the chemical transformation happening inside. And finally, they are what allows the alchemist to separate the pure, essential stuff from all the impure junk.
And here we have the final, brilliant parallel. The parable of cooperating with the fire spirits was a really tangible way to teach the science of controlling heat, what we might call thermal chemistry today. To be a great alchemist, you had to master the application of heat to control chemical reactions and to perform distillations. To master the furnace, you first had to master the salamander.
So, after this whole journey through the elements, what's the big takeaway? What is the real legacy of Paracelsus's strange and kind of beautiful worldview?
This, right here, is the key to his entire legacy. Paracelsus was literally building a bridge from the world of magic to the world of science. These spirits weren't supernatural beings to be prayed to. They were a symbolic language, a clever way to personify the fundamental forces of nature. He used these incredible stories to teach his students how to observe the world, turning folklore into a framework for real, empirical science.
And this leaves us with a really fascinating thought. Paracelsus used myths to translate the rules of nature into a language that people could actually understand. He gave a face to the forces of chemistry. So the question for us is, are we really all that different today? From calling a malicious program a Trojan horse to describing our DNA as a blueprint, where do we still use stories to make sense of science? It really seems like the old alchemist's method is still very much alive.